So we now have, very badly, we now have Chris Clarke from Wales and West, and he's going to talk about ways that we could heat our homes with hydrogen. So I'll hand over to Chris, and off you go.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, and thanks for the invitation to talk to you about heating in the home. And I want to talk about the part that hydrogen could play. And also, finally, I'll just touch on some exciting developments that perhaps challenges the debate between Richard and I, and is there actually a best of both worlds? I think the first question I really wanted to answer, and I'll explain this bit of detail, is why do we need hydrogen at all? If we've got electrification as an option, we know that the technology works, so what's the problem? And I'll explain it in this slide, if I may. So what I want to do is just show you what the profile of heat is and how seasonal it is over the year. So if you take demand for total energy, and this includes transport, power and heat over the year, then you get a profile, and this is the winter where you get very high amounts, and this is all because of need for heat. It drops down in the summer and then climbs back up in the winter. A couple of cities in the UK are thinking about using solar power to heat their homes. And this is the profile of solar generation. And as you imagine, it's much, much higher in the summer. But in the winter, it's actually virtually zero, even on a sunny day like today. And I was just looking at today's stats. Whilst we've got a short peak of high solar activity, because it's very short and short daylight length, it doesn't actually produce much generation. And it's this gap that is the problem that particularly the energy industry has in matching these two things together. Because if you generate it through renewables and then try and use it for heat, you've potentially got to store it from the summer through to the winter. And that's where hydrogen comes in as an option. So a little bit more about hydrogen. So it's been touched on today already, and I just wanted to cover a little bit more about hydrogen. So it's a fuel that burns just like gas, but emits no carbon dioxide when it's actually used. And you might be interested to know that it was actually the main component of Towns gas. Now, Towns gas was the gas we used in the UK before North Sea gas came along. So actually, we've been using hydrogen for some decades, in fact centuries, to some degree in our heating systems. Produced, as we heard earlier, using a chemical reaction, either from methane or it can be generated from renewable electricity. Both ways are fine, but if you produce it through a chemical reaction, we heard earlier that it produces carbon dioxide, and I'll touch on carbon dioxide and what you do with it in a slide in a moment. And in terms of what do you do with it then? Well, actually it can flow through our existing gas pipes that probably about 80% of the United Kingdom has actually feeding to their homes. So you don't need to change all those pipes we're hearing about earlier from Richard, and we've done research with the electricity networks which show that actually most of the electricity cables and substations, etc., would be subject to about 2 or 3 times the demand that they're under now, and therefore might need a lot of work doing on them in the future. The prices, electrolysis, which is using it from generating from electricity, are higher, but research now, because hydrogen is becoming more mainstream, becoming a method of generating energy, then actually a lot more people are starting to think about hydrogen and how it can be produced, and that is already starting to bring the prices down quite quickly. One of the key values of hydrogen is it can be stored in large quantities, and if it's made from methane, then we can store methane in absolutely massive quantities, as we do now, to make sure that we actually provide enough power and heat through the winter. So what's it actually mean in the home itself? Well, cell manufacturers now starting to design hydrogen-ready boilers. What's a hydrogen-ready boiler? It's basically, the picture shows you there on the screen, well, it actually looks very, very similar to a normal boiler. In fact, the outside of it is identical, fits in the same casing as an existing boiler. And what it means, a hydrogen ready, is that if you bought one of these now, it will run on natural gas, and then when hydrogen comes along and changes over, it changes over very, very easily to hydrogen without having to change the installation or do any more work in the home. Very similar to gas boiler. It's happening now. So in January, just last month, this started being produced and being fed into a gas network in Keele University, where homes and the industrial units there are starting to be fed on a hydrogen blend at this stage. And what we could see, though, is if hydrogen-ready boilers are rolled out now, so as and when you change that boiler, a bit like the digital switchover of TV, then actually gradually over time, all homes will be hydrogen-ready for their heating systems. I think it's worth talking a little bit about some of the benefits and some of the challenges for that matter. I've mentioned about how good it is in terms of its availability and how it can be stored and how it can be used seasonally. But there's no need to ban the boiler, which I've been hearing more and more about recently. And therefore it is least disruptive to the homes. You don't have to change your radiators, dig up your floors. And if you've got a hydrogen-ready boiler, you wouldn't even need to change the boiler. The point about maintaining industry as well, hydrogen isn't just going to be used for heating the homes. In fact, its primary purpose and initial purpose may well be for industrial use, keeping jobs in the UK under industry in this country. Some of the challenges, so we've heard about carbon capture and storage. That is one of the challenges. It's not been used in the UK before, but it has been used internationally. In fact, there's 19 places around the world where it's currently being used. In fact, it's starting to be used in the North Sea. It's just not in our sector, but in the Norwegian sector, just across the North Sea from ourselves. Yeah.
I just wanted to raise a question. I thought you said it didn't produce any carbon dioxide. So
yeah, I'll explain that. So when it actually burns, it just produces water. But to create it from methane, it produces carbon dioxide at that point. Yeah, good question. Thanks for clarifying that one. So, is hydrogen produced in the UK already? Yes, it is. There are a number of plants, but they don't capture the carbon at the moment. So they would need to be used with that carbon capture and storage. The people do have reservations about it. So I'm being completely open about that. Certainly around the technology. Which is actually much more available than a number of people think it is, but also the commercial costs of hydrogen, and therefore that has to be considered as part of this, and I'll touch on that in a moment. In terms of design, so this is actually happening now. So in the northwest of England, a detailed design study is being carried out, which would see hydrogen initially being provided to industry with carbon capture and storage, and that carbon dioxide will be pumped back into gas wells in the Liverpool Bay. Pumping gas back into gas wells is actually quite a routine activity. For quite a number of decades we did it in the UK in a storage field called Rough, which was one of the offshore gas fields in the North Sea. So we know that gas can be pumped back and securely stored underground in gas wells. But I did want to spend just a moment or two talking about this new technology, if you want to call it that. It's existing technology but being used in a different way. And this is hybrid heating systems. So can we perhaps take an existing central heating system and add a small air source heat pump, as Richard was showing you just now? And effectively the benefits of this would be through switching technology, so effectively the system would be able to switch and have a look that if we've got cheap renewable electricity available to it at that time, then it would use that. And for example, at the moment, we don't have that. We're actually burning coal at the moment to generate electricity as we sit here at the minute. Whereas when it wasn't available, then it would use the gas. And that green gas, or could be green gas, could be either biomethane, which we touched on earlier, or it could be hydrogen. I did want to mention biomethane. Where I come from, in the southwest of England, it's a bit of a biomethane hotspot. And actually, there's sufficient biomethane using hybrid technology to heat half the homes in the southwest of England already. And therefore, it shouldn't be just discounted as there's not enough of it, because actually using hybrid technology, we could decarbonise homes across the southwest of England. Biomethane is made from waste. So Jenny described it earlier, using something called anaerobic digestion. Basically, you take perhaps slurries from farm waste and turn it into methane. So certainly from my perspective, what I want to do in my home is certainly going to fit our hybrid heating system because it's least disruptive to me. It's going to be much lower cost to fit in my home, and it gives the earliest carbon reduction and has got the potential to decarbonise my home completely. So anyway, thank you very much for listening to me.